Here's to bold visionaries, faithful investors who make God the goal. While some may call them crazy, we see a joyful adventure. God has empowered us to use courageous capital, solving the world's greatest problems under His power for His glory. Welcome to the Faith-Driven Investor Podcast. Opinions expressed in this podcast, including the team and guests, are solely their opinions. Hosts and guests may maintain positions and securities discussed. This podcast is for informational purposes only. It should not be relied upon as specific investment advice for any individual or organization. Thanks for listening.
You know, because the Faith-Driven Investor Podcast is now video, these are key things that we have to talk about and call out, is that Luke's got a tight fade going on, as Andrew Behrman just called to mind.
That's good. That's at least a 0 to a 4 fade right there.
Hey, coffees for closers and also those with a tight fade. And I'm embracing that remark.
We're bringing things down in age in terms of Luke getting, Gen Z haircuts.
I tell you, the two things I can do to make myself look older is grow my hair out and grow a beard, because my beard quickly is becoming almost entirely salt, very little pepper left.
Friends, welcome back to another episode of the Faith-Driven Investor Podcast. If you made it through that intro, I'm really fired up you're here. You get some of the behind the scenes, how the sausage is made. My name is Richard Cunningham. It's a joy to have you with us for what is our November monthly Marks on the Markets episode. I am joined, as always, by one of our faithful co-hosts, and Luke Roush, managing partner, co-CEO of Sovereigns Capital. And Luke, we're doing something fun today as we're bringing some of the home team onto the FDI pod, and Andrew Behrman and Jonathan Carvalho Pruna of the Sovereigns Capital Fund of Funds team. And we're going to talk about an event that we hosted under the Faith-Driven Investor kind of banner that really represented a breadth of private markets asset classes. And so we had real estate folks, private credit folks, private equity folks, venture capital folks, growth equity investors all together a couple weeks ago in Wheaton, Chicago for the annual Faith-Driven Investor Fund Manager Gathering. Andrew and Jonathan, and myself included, as this is my day job at Sovereigns, are fund investors at Sovereigns Capital. And we had the profound joy of kind of bringing this ecosystem together. And today we're going to talk about that event, the way God is moving across the marketplace, some of the themes and trends we saw. And before we say hey to Andrew and Jonathan and kind of get into that, Luke, how are you today, man?
I'm doing great. This is a fun episode where we get a chance to just survey the landscape a little bit more broadly, and to maybe discuss some of what we're hearing from our peers in this space. It was amazing to have more than 130, I think, different asset managers from different asset classes coming together and talking about what it looks like to reflect our faith in the way we invest. And there's a few better ways to compare notes and contrast approaches than doing it in community with others. And so this concept of catalytic community and fellowship amongst a group of faith-driven investors is what we're going to talk about today. But it was hugely educational for me, and excited to hear from two other folks that were in the room last week to be able to process all that together. So catalytic community, let's go.
Come on. Well, Andrew Behrman coming to us from Atlanta, Georgia. And Andrew, this is your second ever FDI podcast appearance. I don't know if it was 2025 when we had you on last, but it was somewhere around end of 24, early 25 when you and Chris Kim came on and talked about kind of the private equity space and secondaries investing. But good to have you back. What is the first thing you would bring up if you were to talk about our time together at Wheaton College?
Man, I think it was just a great reminder that this movement is so global and beyond sovereigns, and just a wide network, as Luke mentioned, over 130 managers represented. That's a drop in the bucket, I think, compared to what the overall movement of faith-driven managers looks like. So that was really exciting to see. Obviously, we talked about Henry Kastner. It's his birthday today, obviously being a great person who planted the seeds that are just starting to germinate across the movement, and see some of that come to fruition. That was exciting. And then I think we had a great walkthrough from the perspective of top down. What does a manager do? What are the levers they can pull to create value in companies? Well, you really unpack it in spiritual integration. How does that ultimately affect the frontline employees? I'm sure we'll walk through some great examples of that we saw. But some of those were just really powerful. And I think it encouraged people in the room that this is real. Companies are made of people, right? And the way that you impact people can be really special through spiritual integration.
Well, if you go back to the first one of these that we hosted was in Silicon Valley. It was at the French Bistro Cafe I guess, maybe 8 years ago now, 7 or 8 years ago. and to see some of those same individuals in the room. It's an evolution, I think, in asset managers who are thinking about reflecting their Christian faith in the way they lead their firms, the way they think about extending their faith in a winsome, culturally appropriate way beyond their own four walls of their asset management firm, but into portfolio companies and into individuals who work in those portfolio companies on the front lines. It's an indication of how far the Lord has allowed us collectively to be able to journey from maybe a place of like, wow, I'm thinking about this. I've been praying about it. I feel like God's trying to lead me towards something. Now, this many years later, being able to reflect on like actual lived out examples of what that faith manifestation looks like in and through firms. And so it's I sense a real movement, Richard. I don't know if you sense the same thing.
That's honestly, Luke, that's a perfect segue into saying hey to Jonathan Carvalho Pruna, or a guy JCP who's down in West Palm Beach, Florida. Because Luke, you're one of the kind of the co-authors of this space. You're too humble to take credit. Really, this is God has been working. Aslan is on the move, is what we like to say. But you've been there from the beginning. Jonathan, this was your first event to kind of see the Faith-Driven Investor Fund Manager gathering. I'd love to hear kind of your instant reactions before we kind of start pulling on some of those threads Andrew has taken us into.
It was amazing. I mean, I think there were moments of just heavy-hearted moments that was like, wow, just eye-opening spiritually in the way God has just been moving through fund managers, portfolio company leaders. We had Brinley Fire Services up there. I'm sure we'll get to that part, but just one of the employees there was sharing how he was caring for his neighbor and his child had just drowned. It was just an incredible story on how the Lord had positioned this business to love their community well, and to think that there's a sponsor behind that business looking to grow it for God's kingdom. It's just amazing. So there was a number of examples like that, but heartfelt in a number of times. So
yeah, I think that's something I've seen at least the past couple of events I've been at. And Richard, I'd love to get your thoughts, because you've been such a leader in gathering this group now for several years. But the level of vulnerability I think that we have in that room, both in the past event and this year's event, I think that's probably not really pervasive across the industry, right? And so having people be real about, here are the things that I struggle with, it opens up a lot of dialogue on how do we grow in this together, right? And seeing some of the things that people have been through, both at the frontline employee side, like Jonathan mentioned, but just as a manager too, and what has been a very difficult fundraising environment in the private markets. I think that opened people's eyes to like, hey, it's we're especially formed in community. Nobody gets formed by themselves as a follower of Christ. And private equity and venture capital is no different than the broader church.
Yeah, no doubt. That's well said. Well, hey, in light of that, maybe let's kind of hop in and get into some of these like specific themes. And it's dealer's choice here, gentlemen. If there's something that we click on, feel free to go to town on that particular topic. But first and foremost, for people who are like, man, this feels relevant to me, I'm a fund manager, don't hesitate to drop us a line. Reach out to the Faith-Driven Investor team, us here at Sovereigns Capital. Like, we would love to get you into this mix. Like, there is a movement afoot. You just heard about it. We had 130 general partners together. We've done the first two of these in Silicon Valley. We just did this one in Wheaton College to kind of broaden the aperture and say, hey, this is not just for venture, which people often associate Silicon Valley with. This is also broadly to asset classes. We hosted it at beautiful Wheaton College. We think this thing will travel. I think our next iteration of this might be Dallas or Austin or New York or somewhere else. So kind of stay tuned, but we'd love to have you involved if you're managing a fund. Would love for you to kind of be involved in this community. Chad Renbrandt, who is the treasurer at Wheaton, gave us a great welcome. We had an awesome local pastor join us and shared some incredibly powerful words. But then that first panel that I want to get into is we had Grant Jackson of Council Capital. We had Jake Thompson of Sovereigns Capital, who runs the venture business there. We had James Tiang of Lumos Capital, who's a growth equity investor, and Chris Kim of Argosy Strategic Partners up on a panel talking about, hey, what's going on in their particular asset classes. Andrew said it. All these guys also stepped up to the stage with some vulnerability too, and just said, hey, we're whole persons. We bring whole people to work. It's not just about the investment side of the aisle, but it's also who I am as a father, a husband, as a whole person, as I kind of take the pen as an investor as well. What stood out to you guys as you think about that first panel with Jake, Chris, Grant, James, and the different kind of asset classes that each of those gentlemen represent? Luke, we'll start with you.
I think just some amount of just diversity of approach, and I think that you said it in terms of just the humility exhibited by folks on that first panel. and their desire to be about something that's bigger than themselves. I think that one of the things that is a natural human tendency, but the Bible has really an explicit warning against it, is this idea of having a mindset of scarcity, where we want to see ourselves in direct competition with others, and yet the reality is that we serve a God of abundance, and so I think putting on full display as we go about our work, where we've had challenges, where we've maybe fallen short, where investments, not just for financial reasons but also spiritual impact reasons, maybe haven't played out, and what have we learned in and through those things. I think that that was cool to hear from one investor in healthcare, all the way to a different investor in secondary offerings. It was kind of a completely different vector than anything we've talked about at prior conferences. But how do you provide capital to funds or individual limited partners that need to go ahead and wrap up their work? And so just the diversity of different approaches is what stuck out to me.
Yeah. Andrew, I'd like to come to you with this next question. I thought one of the things that was interesting is we had James up there of Lumos Capital and Grant Jackson of Council Capital. James is primarily an education technology investor, and the education sphere is just in the direct crosshairs of kind of some of the new administration changes that are going on, as well as the healthcare sphere. And I thought hearing them kind of talk about their respective spaces in the midst of kind of tectonic shifts happening underneath their footing was fascinating. Maybe kind of offer some commentary as to what you heard there.
Yeah, I actually think those were two of the interesting part of that speaking panel was we got to see that, hey, things are not, we talk about efficient markets, right? And that things in private equity and venture capital and in the private markets in broader economics, like not everything's perfect, right? Like just like the broader, we live in a broken world. So there are things in private equity in the education system and the healthcare system that are broken, right? And these managers, this is why we ask every manager, what are they called to? Where is your experience kind of meet God's calling on your life? Because we think where that intersection occurs, you can make a real difference with the power of the Holy Spirit. And so I think hearing like, hey, listen, healthcare is 19% of GDP. It's unsustainable. Hearing that over 50% of physicians are burnt out, right? Like, they don't have purpose in their work. Eliminating waste and thinking about how do we improve outcomes for patients? Like those are things in the healthcare system that are broken, and it takes, in my belief, a faith-driven entrepreneur investor coming into that space and saying, how do we actually redeem this space, right? That's part of our cultural mandate in Genesis 1:26 that kind of came up consistently throughout the day. And I think education's not different, right? There are areas in education, especially the public education system. I'm not an expert there. James is. But understanding like, hey, there are ways that we can step into this space and create better cultures, create better outcomes for learners, whether that's in K-12, higher ed, or workforce development. I think that was a really inspirational piece. And then I'll go a little bit longer and say, if I could unpack just a broader trend, if you go back to like the 1980s of private equity, right? Yeah. We read about these stories of like barbarians at the gate, and that there are these public companies getting highly leveraged, right? That people are using the cash flows of this business to generate almost all of the return. I mean, I would say the majority of returns in the 1980s actually came from capital structuring versus operational growth or multiple expansion. Those are kind of the other two levers of private equity returns, right? If you go to the 2000s, you start to see that things became a little bit more equal. So you had capital structure about a third of returns, multiple arbitrage, or being able to sell at a higher multiple later with that business, about a third, and a third operational. In this higher for longer rate environment in the 2020s, I'd suggest there's a chance that, more than 60, 70% of the returns in this space, and Luke will be much more attuned to this in the lower middle market practice, it's going to come through operational value creation. And I think that's a little bit of what we heard of, like, you got to step into a space and create real value with the operations of the company that you're partnering with, or you're just not going to be an outperformer in private equity and venture capital for much longer.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what you were mentioning about just James being the expert in ed tech. That's kind of what we did with the manager gathering, just invited a bunch of experts in their space that are building just awesome businesses. That's one of the notes I was thinking about discussing on this podcast, is just that being a major component to generation of alpha, and what's going to differentiate in all segments of the market, lower to upper, to mega funds. So.
Yeah. Andrew, what you clicked on in the healthcare space, I think is fascinating. I like hearing Grant talk about it because He said, look, let's just call a spade a spade. Like the structural reality of healthcare right now is we have an aging population, so there's greater demand for healthcare, and we have a decreasing number of physicians. And so all of a sudden now the supply of healthcare providers is going down, the demand is going up. What he said just very soberly is like things look good for people who are looking to generate alpha and in kind of the private equity space who are specifically healthcare investors. There is increased demand, there's a shortage of supply. Business solutions brought to the fold are likely going to bear success. But we also have this kind of just structural issue and systemic issue with, insurance, reimbursers and all of that stuff going on. And it's going to take faith-driven approaches. It's going to take people building from a place of kind of value creation mindset, like you said, not just, hey, how can I go in and exploit the system where there's returns to be generated? How can I bring kind of a for others mindset into this space? And I thought Grant did a great job of speaking to that. James as well, as he kind of talked about the education space.
Well, historically, whether it's venture capital or private equity, two of the areas of our economy that have been most resilient have been healthcare and education, right? Like people get sick, people get old, and people need to be educated, right? If there's children being born. I think what's an interesting point in time right now that both James and Grant spoke to at some measure was the dynamism in both of those sectors, right? What we've always done in healthcare is not what we're always going to do necessarily. What we've always done in education is most certainly not what we're always going to be doing to educate our youth. And so I'm actually really interested to see, as not just the established incumbents in those two arenas, but also new entrants who maybe have more of a clean slate, more of a zero-based budget to start from. I'm really interested to see how that space transforms based on a unique and hopefully creative, redemptive, restorative calling of business operators in those arenas. And, James is doing that, Grant's doing that. I think others are doing it as well.
Yeah, the antithesis of those folks that were buying physicians groups, merging them together, kind of rolling up these practices and then just stripping out expenses and just creating worse outcomes for patients. I think
That's right.
what we're looking at now is better patient outcomes. And I'm glad to see people like Ascend Partners and Council Capital and those folks kind of coming to the front lines to bring to bear those places. And they're doing it from a faith conviction. Hey, before we move on from that panel, Jonathan, I want to go to you real quickly because the third person that was on that panel that I thought was tremendous was Chris Kim, who is a secondaries investor.
Yeah.
Will you kind of just talk about, one of the things Chris said frequently was like, hey, secondaries is kind of having its day. Will you kind of explain why that is the case right now and like what it means for an LP to be liquidity starved and why someone who's kind of bringing a secondaries offering to market is having a lot of success right now?
Yeah, definitely. So the secondaries market is just having its day because there's a liquidity issue. Funds are aging. They're not having exit events within the portfolio, and existing at limited partners are not getting distributions to contribute to subsequent funds, to do other things, even invest in the public markets. And so secondaries offers a very short-term liquidity solution to this very big need that we have. And one of the things I loved about what Chris Kim was talking about was just not only how he's taking a faith-driven approach to the how behind his investment strategy and how he executes transactions, how he thinks about closing deals from the initial IOI to the closing of the investment, but how he cares for his portfolio companies. How he cares for his employees, which I think was really encouraging to a lot of folks in the room, wondering like, how do I do this from day one? Oftentimes they may not be thinking about taking care of their investment team members, but that is huge. And I think about actually pastors in the marketplace that get so focused on their mission, but might necessarily neglect their family in some way. So there's an awesome ministry that he has and that he shared regarding his own investment team, in addition to his strategy. So,
yeah, I totally agree, Jonathan. I thought Chris really unpacked what does it look like to demonstrate to his team members service in their community, which actually they're going to bring to their annual general meeting this year, he mentioned to me as well. And just, looking like Christ to his teammates in many ways. And I think that's as important in some ways as the portfolio company activity is how you're treating your underlying team, which is awesome. Just to speak a little bit more on the secondaries front, this is one of the most interesting strategies right now in the private markets. And I'll tell you, there's three factors that Chris went over. But the first is, if you look at the trailing 12 months buyout funds specifically, the percentage of the net asset value of that overall industry. So think whatever that multiple $1 trillion of private equity roughly 15% of that is getting distributed out as NAV. Historically, that's been roughly 25 to 30% in any given year. And so we're much lower than the average. It's been that way over the past 8 or 12 quarters since rates started rising. And so really key component there of like, capital is locked up a bit longer than people were hoping in the private markets. The secular growth of this space is crazy. I mean, in 2019, it was $88 billion of transaction volume, and in 2024 is $162 billion. So it almost doubled.
Wow.
In 2029, it's expected to get to $330 billion, representing about 2.25% overall NAV. So if you even think to yourself for a moment, with the entrance of retail investors into the private markets, more investor types that actually need idiosyncratic liquidity, and you just say, hey, that could end up at 3-4% of NAV. Think about just the secular tailwind of growth behind that transaction volume itself. And then the third key component that Chris highlighted is, and just 2 years ago or 3 years ago in 2022, the capital raised in secondaries is about 2 times the transaction volume. Today, that's 1.4 times. So there's not enough capital being raised in this space for the amount of supply that's being generated. So think about the level of selectivity you can have, the opportunity for new players in that space. So secondaries is, I'm excited about what we're seeing in that space. Some of those managers, and I think to his point, it is a key time for that strategy as the private markets need liquidity.
Yeah, man, you're not wrong. I think everyone kind of thought of this space initially as like, hey, I'm a Facebook employee and I've just been sitting here with stock options forever that have appreciated so tremendously. I'm willing to sell those at a discount cut so I can finally kind of cash out that value I had. But as you're talking about, I mean, just what has happened from an LP-led transaction, that's over half of the market now. And then, Andrew, that data you got into almost double the growth since just 2019. I saw another stat out there that like 10 to 15 years ago, the secondaries market was somewhere between the magnitude of 10 to 20 billion. Now we're knocking on the door of 200 billion, a great solution for private markets to kind of help LPs out and kind of generate a second option for just sitting there with assets on balance sheets.
Yes. And I think actually, so one of the things that is a hot topic right now in the marketplace is how do we democratize access to private markets? And so, as the number of publicly traded companies has dwindled in the last 20 or 30 years, generally kind of down into the right, and a lot of the wealth creation is actually involved privately held companies that are choosing to stay private longer for different reasons. To include, the increased regulatory cost of actually being a publicly traded company. This issue of how do we solve for the liquidity in what have traditionally been illiquid markets, that need, which Chris and others are solving in the secondaries, that need is only going to continue to increase as we look to democratize access more broadly to privately held vehicles.
Luke, that's such an important point you're making. There were 6,500 publicly traded companies in roughly kind of the 1995 to 1997 era. That number today is 4,700. So that point you just called to mind about companies are staying private for longer, choosing to stay private altogether, going from public to private because they see kind of the unique benefits. And because of that, how can investors get into that ball field of the private space? All right, gents, we're going to take a hard left turn and we're going to talk about something else that was paramount to this conference. But we're going to kind of step away from the markets data a little bit. And we're going to go into 2 things that we would call spiritual integration practices. So unique ways managers are bringing their faith to bear through their work of investing. Shout out to our guy, Andrew Behrman, who we've got here on the podcast with us today. He facilitated a tremendous panel with our friends at the Riverside Value Fund on this topic of broad-based employee ownership that a buyout private equity fund like Riverside is rolling out across its portfolio. And then we can talk a little bit about, Jonathan, you teased it out earlier, the folks at Brinley Mountain Fire who are living out a faith-driven company culture daily through the work of chaplains. Andrew, maybe tee up those kind of 2 SI practices panels that we heard.
Oh, man. Well, I think those were 2 of the most powerful, items on the itinerary for the day. And, Ownership Works and the Riverside Value Fund. I mean, when we first met those guys, that was something they were exploring as an idea. So to see that, I mean, to Luke's point, that was several years ago. And now to see some of that transpire, them have their first exit and actually be able to give some of those payouts alongside that exit to the employees of that company, equivalent, in one exit that they made to 3.5 months salary for that team broadly, everybody on the front line. and you'll be able to see the reaction, right, of them having been owners when that rollout occurred, as well as to say, like, we received financial advisory services before we received that check. And just to see those team members be able to participate alongside the sponsor. I mean, what an incredible outcome. I think, Sean and Mark obviously led that session and were very transparent on, hey, here were the difficulties we experienced with rolling this out. It's complicated, right? It takes rolling your sleeves up and being involved alongside the executives of the company. But it's worth it, right? There is so much talk around growing the pie, right? Like, this isn't a zero-sum game. This was about, how do we encourage employees to participate and bring new ideas? And you saw that in the data. I mean, you saw great new ideas resulting in EBITDA improvements. You saw voluntary employee attrition cut in half during that period when Ownership Works was rolled out, and employee safety incidents cut in half. And so just a great item there. And then we transitioned to Brinley, where really, James came out with his team members. I think all of us talked after that. I was like, what an incredible thing that he brought people that, are on the front line of the company just to talk about what does that culture mean to them. And he shared, James shared briefly, here's what it looks like to have a sponsor that is aligned with you from a values perspective and is willing to let people come and bring their whole selves to work. And then to have those people share, here are the opportunities I've had to bring my whole self to work, what that's meant for me, how I've grown. Man, incredible stories out of that. I think everybody would be encouraged to say, how do we develop this?
Yeah, no kidding. Jonathan, you come from large secular private equity firm backgrounds.
Yeah.
How maybe like countercultural or just like wild is it to see managers roll out this concept of broad-based employee ownership to grow the pie, to be clear, like this could actually contribute to everyone's returns.
Yeah.
But just that mindset of saying, hey, we want to shift ownership away from just a private equity firm or just like the very select management team to a manufacturing shop floor line worker.
I think the best way to characterize it is how Sean characterized it when he was talking about Ownership Works, when the co-CEO was kind of like, hey, Sean, if you want to give away equity, I'm taking some. I have never learned how to model out in a sources and uses when I was in my banking days, equity to employees across the entire business. It's incredibly countercultural. And it's a way that one of these managers who loves the Lord has said, this is how I'm going to outpour my faith into my portfolio companies. These are how I'm going to love my people. And it's not only, it was awesome because it sparked so many ideas around chaplaincy. It sparked just people thinking about, hey, how can I structurally create an offering and a management fee discount where the discount can be contributed to a tithing, something like this, where one of the venture managers I'm thinking about explicitly was in a small group of other VCs talking about some wild ideas. And I use quote unquote because they're not really that wild. Like, they're very practical. But it was a space that was created that could allow him to think about these things because he's seeing others do it. So coming from a place where, you have a certain persona, you have a certain work, the objective is just exclusively money in whatever way possible, to a place where you can do both. I think it's not only countercultural, it's really important. It's what we're called to do as Christians.
Well, I think what it gets to is just this alignment, right? Like, what we're all looking for is, alignment and outcomes. One of my great fears as an asset manager is that somehow, like, a company loses and somehow we win as an investor, or vice versa, right? Like, maybe, a company wins and somehow we're not participating in that. And so, not to say that it's a one size fits all. And I don't know that particular approach makes sense in every business all the time. But I think it's a novel approach to thinking really carefully about, hey, what could we help to enable by making sure that everybody feels really aligned with the outcome that we're all charging to. And I think that their articulation of how do they decide where they roll that out by platform, what are the kinds of things that they want to do as a part of that, short of just, hey, let's roll this out so that everybody gets a big payday when the company exits someday. But some of the things that they put around that to try to help set people up for long-term success, whether those individuals actually stay at the company or whether those individuals end up in a different company, trying to help put the right pieces around that skin in the game ownership that inspired a lot of operational improvements within the businesses. Just it struck me as very thoughtful and very, just great perspective.
And the last thing I'll say is it's actually really relevant to this discussion about employee ownership. Is the whole company was founded, I believe, from a former KKR investor who saw that gap and how employee ownership really generates value through NIPS, right, at the executive level. But it's the shop floor employee that's generating a lot of insight into how things can be done. So, I mean, it's you could see that this person who was working in large private equity kind of saw that gap to fill.
Yeah, I think you guys make a great point, and I hope that was some of the outcome of the panel there. Both panels, both with Brinley and with Ownership Works and Riverside, was that, hey, the expressions of this can look very different, and people will have ideas that come from that. I hope, Lord willing, that will look entirely different. Maybe the structure is different, but the inspiration is there, and hopefully we continue to see these new areas of like redemptive spiritual integration practices coming to the market. It's exciting.
Yeah. Hey, Luke, one of the things I want to get some commentary from you on is you've been investing in startups now for 15, 20 years. You've been buying small businesses. You sit on public company boards. Sovereigns has a publicly traded vehicle. You've been buying multifamily complexes. You're part of the fund investing complex at Sovereigns. You've seen the breadth of asset classes. Talk about just the role a chaplain can play inside a business and how you can kind of shift the focus to people and how that kind of downstream actually creates success that we as investors care about.
Yeah. So many of the things that we hear about, that we see directly, or that we have a chance to actually put in play through investments are oftentimes timely tactics. And that's just that, what one situation demands is different than what would be experienced in a different situation. And so most things are timely and or, asset class specific. I think the construct of having an individual who is tasked with, at least as one of their primary, if not the only responsibility they have, but the idea of tasking an individual with the core remit to try to care for the spiritual well-being of employees, that strikes me as one of the few things that we encounter that is very timeless and is always in the best interest, not just for people and doing the right thing, but also of the business, the underlying business. And so it's been the go-to tactic that we've seen work on the broadest possible scale: public companies, private companies, real estate, operating businesses, early stage, late stage. And so it is probably the only thing in our list, our compendium of different spiritual integration tools, tactics, techniques, that has that breadth of relevance to whatever the ownership group is, as well as to every individual that works in the company. It doesn't mean that everybody is going to access those services as much as everybody else, but at times it's a little bit like you don't need it until you need it, and then you really need it, and then you wish you had somebody that's actually kind of in the business. And so and who knows people, has connected with them on a very human level, and just been available to pray, to process things that are going on. So it's a phenomenal tactic. We heard about it in depth from Brinley. We've heard about it from other people during the day last week at Wheaton. So I can't speak highly enough. And there's great organizations that are out there. A lot of times people think, oh, it's, publicly traded CEO, or I'm too late stage, or I'm working in Silicon Valley, and, the culture out here wouldn't really be as accepting of the idea of chaplaincy. But, every professional sports team, the U.S. military, U.S. Congress, all these organizations have chaplaincy, and, many, many publicly traded companies as well. So it is as universal as any other spiritual integration tactic that I can think of.
Yeah. And the guy who officiated my wife and I's wedding was the chaplain of our baseball team. And it's just, he was there hanging out where the sausage was getting made, practice games. And just when you're doing life side by side like that, that's where the real stuff starts to happen. So it's a good word, Luke. All right, gents, let's go into the afternoon session. I'm sensitive to time here. And I'm going to kind of tee up who spoke and give them a little bit of love and airtime because they were all tremendous, and let you guys kind of maybe point to something that really stood out to you and a theme you maybe want to kind of add some color to. But John Coleman gave a remarkable talk, our other co-CEO to Luke here at Sovereign's Capital, on human flourishing in the marketplace. And he talked about, as our Western society gets more prosperous, our contentment levels are actually going down. And whereas people used to look to work as a place to find meaning and gratification, that is disappearing. I think you showed something like Italy and Spain are the only countries people are even having like a marginally good time at work. It's just disappeared here domestically in the US. And so powerful talk about how we as investors, the people who are on the cap table and have controlling influence of these businesses, can change that narrative. Thought that was phenomenal. John then hosted a markets chat with Tim McReady of Brightlight and Victoria Fernandez of Crossmark. I thought they were tremendous, adding commentary on the markets, but more than anything, talking about just the leveling up required across the faith-driven investing space to be authentic to our impact measurement. And how that, if we're going to go out there and say, hey, this is a fund that is accomplishing this from a profit standpoint, but also from an impact standpoint, that can't be secondary in terms of how you report that. I thought they were phenomenal. And then we had an afternoon panel with Ben Erskine, who's a real estate investor, David Wiley of Hilltop Residential, who's a real estate investor, Chris Cathcart out of Washington, D.C. of the Halifax Group, talking about the cultures they've created in their firms. And then guys, jog my memory, who was up there with them? Oh, Mark Phillips, our local Wheaton guy of 11 Tribes Ventures, and the way they have committed to founder care in their investment thesis, which I thought was wonderful. And then the day closed down with none other than Luke Roush, but right before Luke Roush was Alex Jones, one of the co-founders of Hallow, the first ever Christian app to go #1 in the App Store. And man, that was powerful, talking about his story of surrender and letting go of kind of the reins of Hallow and the way God has just multiplied the impact of that business that all of us, honestly, many of us are using today as a way that we kind of encounter the Lord in our daily walk. So a lot there to double click on. Each of you gets kind of one theme. Andrew Behrman, we'll start with you. Where would you want to focus?
Oh man. I would say the biggest theme for me, and it goes back to John's piece as well on purpose, is just as a manager, investment manager, you're a steward. And so how are you stewarding capital and your influence in those underlying businesses where you own them, whether you own them outright or you have a board seat? How are you steering them to impact the frontline employees, right? I think that was just a kind of consistent theme that we continually heard throughout the day. And even on the panel with real estate, right? You think about something like Apartment Life and the ability to put someone on the ground there that's ultimately stewarding relationships with tenants, right? As a married couple walking around that property. Obviously 11 Tribes thinking about the management teams of their businesses and how mental health will actually reinforce the health of the overall business and the frontline employees of those startups. So I think, taking the step a little bit further to say, how does my stewardship impact the ultimate person that's on the front lines? Just a considerable theme for me throughout the day.
That's good. Jonathan, where would you chime in?
Man, I it's kind of where I started with just the portfolio company employees talking through the ways they're able to love their customers effectively, right? The people they're responding to are kind of the ways the company is able to love their community and customers well. And you could see the breadth of that across the 100+ firms represented at the gathering. And just, you kind of stood in awe. And so for me, a big takeaway was just standing in awe and the way God was moving through these different managers to think about how they can actuate their faith in their portfolio company. So a lot of what Andrew touched on was a big theme for me.
I was most impacted by Alex's comments on Hallow and just the importance of recognizing who is the author and perfecter of our faith, who is the author and perfecter of anything that is positive or good or impactful that we're a part of professionally. And, what the world would say to us is that it's really about leadership. It's really about people. And what I loved about Alex's comments, and this is an individual, it's the largest prayer app in the world now. There's over 1 billion prayers that have been, helped to be catalyzed by the how God has used that app. And it would be easy for Alex to attribute some part of the success of that company that he's had a chance to co-labor in with others to, his own ingenuity or, the investor pool they've been able to get together or the tactics of how they've kind of grown their installed base of users, and to hear him re-anchor repeatedly into just how God has showed up in the same way that he is working in and perfecting our own faith through sanctification over time. He is working in and through that company. And so I think that, for our listeners who are in the midst of helping to lead or catalyze or build or grow or whatever different asset management firms, it's important for us to go and do likewise in how we think about the impact of our work and where ultimately any success that any of us has comes from. And it's amazing what you can see even in the room, as Alex shared, of people all of a sudden just kind of like, putting some part of their own hype reel down and just recognizing like how God is at work. So that was very, very impactful for me in the afternoon.
Yeah, like great quote of that moment Alex came to and saying, "All right, if this succeeds, God, I promise I'll never take any of the credit." And then kind of concluding his speaking session with like, "I still don't take the credit. It's all God." So really exciting. Great reminder, Luke. Thanks.
Yep.
Yeah. Even the visual Alex had up there of, you get in a room like this and the temptation is to go, how much money do you manage? What company did you back that became a unicorn? Did you 5, 6, 7x a company if you're more of a buyout real estate investor? What did that, or private equity investor? And Alex was up there and he showed the visual of Peter fishing when they ultimately got their call. And it was when Jesus said to cast your nets over here. And Alex, just the picture of surrender. He was like, I was a poor fisherman on my own, and God had me go this way. And just like that picture of surrender was unbelievably powerful. Gents, any saved rounds you would offer as we think about the manager gathering, and that kind of like one last thing you'd want to implore to folks before I go to our final question and we look to God's word here to close down our time?
I would just challenge folks to really lean into the ways that they can love on their investment teams and their portfolio companies. Doing that in light of scripture, in light of a lot of prayer. I think that is for us at Sovereigns as much as it is for any manager that's responsible for stewarding the resources God's given them. So that's just a challenge to the audience.
I think the only thing I would add is, and I said this in my closing remarks, but if not us, who? If not now, when? And, the Lord has given each of us an opportunity to be impactful in the spheres where he has us operating. And, if not through us, he'll find somebody else to do it. And so I think that a lot of times, particularly in countries like the US, where we don't feel that sense of real spiritual oppression or want in the same way that others around the world might feel that in a more acute way by virtue of where they are or the resource base they have to operate from. It's really important, I think, for us to find ways to lean in, to get in the game. And, God has us in the positions that we hold for a reason and for a purpose. And we need to be faithful in how we steward that. And I think most of us probably need to get pushed more than we're currently pushing ourselves or being pushed by peer groups. So we need to invite others into our lives. We need to find community of individuals who will challenge us, that won't just kind of nod and in agreement and cheer us on, but people who will really sharpen us in a Proverbs 27:17 kind of way. So that's my saved round, and that's it, Richard.
It's money. That's well said. I thought your closing remarks to the gathering, Luke, were perfect, timely, and timeless, to kind of use some of your analogy. As our friend Henry Kastner likes to say, this faith-driven investing movement will never be prescriptive. You might be called as an investor to go build solar farms in the Nevada desert, as Henry likes to say, or you might answer the bell and say, man, I feel like I need to go to Africa and invest in early stage founders over there. That's my kind of unique expression of faith-driven investing. We will never be prescriptive or presumptuous about what that looks like, but we invite you in prayer to be very descriptive about how God might be calling you to get in the game and get off the sidelines, as Luke is talking about. All right, well, guys, let's pose a little scripture. Rapid fire here. Andrew, we'll start with you. What's God been teaching you in and through his word as we take this thing to the close?
I don't know. I'm in the Pauline epistles right now, and I don't know. Something that sticks out is just Paul's encouragement to the churches that he obviously helped start, left, moved on, still writing to them and encouraging them in that way. But I've just been thinking about service a lot. I've got a toddler right now, one on the way in December, so a pregnant wife now with 8 weeks remaining here, 9 weeks, and then I'm one of the youth leaders for middle school boys at my church. So it's just a great reminder that uh, service matters, and it's actually not for you; it's for others. I think Jesus modeled it so well that as little as we were worth, he came and stepped into our place for our sins, and so I've just been really encouraged by that. And it was actually a real blessing to serve alongside you guys. I mean, I watched you guys in the big things and the small, step up, setting table tents, stepping up on stage where it was appropriate for you to share. And so encouraged by that and to be members of y'all's team.
Awesome. Jonathan, what would you add?
Man, I cannot top that. I think I'm going to be labeled as a heretic after I give my thoughts. No, that was good. I was actually thinking about this. So I've been going through the book of Revelation. There's a lot to unpack there, but I would really actually like to talk about what I was meditating on today after we had youth yesterday, and the youth pastor was talking about 2 Corinthians 11 and the term super apostles. This is Paul talking about how he didn't come as one of these super apostles with big air quotes, but he came humbly, imperfect, very, very weak, imperfect in appearance and in speech. And I was just thinking about that in my own life. And the actual key takeaway for me was love and the way he loved those people. And so God kind of drew me to 1 Corinthians 13. And now I'm trying to memorize that through one of the children's songs that I show with my daughter. And I show with my daughter, I show to my daughter. But it's really for me. And it's just amazing what love really is. And that kind of ties into what Andrew was talking about as far as service and it being sacrificial. So that's just something that I've really been meditating on for the last 24 hours, but I hope to be doing it for a bit more.
Come on, a race to the bottom, if you will. Luke, take us home.
All right. Hey, so I'm going through this book. I've got a group. If you're a listener and you've never led a faith or facilitated a faith-driven investor foundation series, I encourage you to maybe pray about doing that in addition to hosting a watch party for the next Faith-Driven Investor Conference in the spring. But we're going through this book because we've kind of already been through the foundational series a couple of times. And the book is one of these timeless books called Spiritual Leadership by Oswald Sanders. And we just had chapter 20 today, which is about reproducing leaders. It's really talking about reproducing leaders within the church and within ministry, but I think it's equally as appropriate and relevant in the work that we do in asset management and reflecting our faith in that context. But it comes from 2 Timothy 2:2. The things you have heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable men who will also be qualified to teach others. And so it's this idea of how do you leave the ladder down? We need to constantly being pulled into things, being pulled forward in our own development, but we also need to be bringing others along. And if you're in college right now and listening to this, then there may be some high school students or some younger underclassmen that need to be pulled along. If you're in your mid 20s, maybe it's older college students. If you're in your 80s, maybe it's some 50, 60, 70-year-olds that are aspiring to finish well in the same way that you have and are finishing well. And so I just encourage folks to lean into what does this look like to reproduce, so that the journey doesn't end with you, but it's how will God continue to use you irrespective of kind of where you are in your own journey. So that's my encouragement is 2 Timothy 2:2.
Let's go. Andrew Behrman, Jonathan Carvalho Pruna, Luke Roush. Guys, what a profound encouragement to have you on the FDI pod today, talking a little bit about the Faith-Driven Investor Fund Manager Gathering, getting into some of the trends of private markets. Thank you guys for the ways you serve in this FDI space from the seats you sit in at Sovereign's Capital and more broadly. Folks, this has been another Marks on the Markets episode. Thanks for tuning in. For these guys, I am Richard Cunningham. We will catch you next time.
Come for content? Stay for community. Join a faith-driven investing group online or in person. Visit faithdriveninvestor.org. That's faithdriveninvestor.org.